everyone, and welcome to the True Crime Grapple podcast. I'm your host Dan. Well, after a fantastic episode on Armin Meiwes to mark our 1 year anniversary, that's right, 1 year anniversary, we're starting off our next year with another. This is a really interesting one, as it's one I've not heard of before, and I'm sure that'll be the same for many of you out there. Usual stuff before we get to the story today. Join us on social media. Our Facebook and Instagram is at True Crime Grapple, and our Twitter is at TCG3682. As always, if you listen through Apple Podcasts, take a moment to leave a 5-star review and a nice comment. Much obliged to you. Show today is written by Jim Pitts, music and editing is by BaBaBeats and narrated by me. Now, a further warning, this episode talks about the terrible death of not just adults but children and animals. Please consider going any further if this may be too much for you to handle. That being said, it's now time for your fix. So lock that door, sit back and relax, because it is true crime time. It is true crime time. It is true crime time.
Mother. Walk is slow. Mother, there's the school bell ringing. I believe our clock is slow. And the mother sighed and answered, yes, it's time for you to go. Down the path across the footbridge, where the yellow cowslips grew. Ah, the purple Johnny jump-ups. For my teacher, just a few. Mother watched her treasured darling, till he passed the soundboard slow. And the big bell in the belfry still was swinging to and fro. Heavy is her heart this morning, like her call, fear, or her hum. And her tasks are still unfinished, and her song is yet unsung. Up the steps, soon all are seated, when to the teacher posies bring. When a little hand is lifted, teacher, won't you let us sing? And the teacher smiled and nodded. What will your selection be? Oh, it's the jewels in the knapsack, and it's on page 53. When he cometh, sing the children. And the teacher looking down on their happy upturned faces, wreathed in locks of gold or brown, or the ones whose flaxen ringlets against the midnight treasures shone, thought what was jewels for a Savior, they his loved ones and his own. Like the stars, the chorus swelling, laughing faces, not one frown, they shall shine in saint-like beauty, dazzling bright, gems for his crown. He will gather white-robed angels, o'er them bore the wings of love, to the Father who was waiting in the blessed home above. 40 children and their teachers knelt before the Savior King. In his loving arms, he clasped them, and the last bell ceased to ring.
Criminals are made. Not born. This is not a story about trying to find out who the criminal is. Authorities quickly knew it was Andrew Kehoe. Nor is it a story about motive. Essentially, Kehoe was upset over increased taxes. This is a story about the downward spiral of a man and how his actions affected families for generations. More importantly, this is a story of the children who died that day and the survivors whose stories need to be remembered as a reminder in today's society. An excellent book on this tragedy is The Bath Massacre, America's First School Bombing by Arnie Bernstein, which was a valuable resource for this story. Dunblane, March 13th, 1996. 17 dead. Columbine, April 20th, 1999. 13 dead. Virginia Tech, April 16th, 2007. 32 dead. Sandy Hook, December 14th, 2012. 27 dead. Parkland, February 14th, 2018. 17 dead. Santa Fe, May 18th, 2018. 10 dead. What do the places all have in common? All of these names of places have become synonymous with the loss of young, innocent life. It's the first thing people think of when they hear these names. All were perpetrated by one or two gunmen. All shocked and outraged the public. The shootings at Columbine High School, located just outside Denver, Colorado, changed American schools forever. The feeling of safety and security parents had for their children at school was lost in that day more than 20 years ago. But school killings did not start with Columbine, or even that day 3 years earlier in Stirling, Scotland at Dunblane Primary School when Thomas Hamilton murdered 16 students and a teacher. But what about Bath Township? Located just 13 miles northeast of Lansing, the state capital of Michigan, Bath is rarely mentioned with those other towns, despite being the oldest and deadliest incident of school violence in US history. The earliest known incident took place in 1840, when a law professor was shot and killed by a student involved in causing a disturbance at the University of Virginia. Prior to 1927, most school slayings in the United States, like the one in 1840 Virginia, involved one or two deaths, usually as a result of an accident or a dispute between two people. On May 18, 1927, this all changed in a tiny place known as Bath Township in Michigan. Bath Township is located just outside Lansing, the state capital of Michigan, in what is known as the Mid-Michigan area of the state. By 1900, the area was still mainly rural, populated with small farms. As such, the area was also the home of the Agricultural College of the state of Michigan, the first agricultural college in the United States in what is now East Lansing. The school would be renamed several times, including State Agricultural College and Michigan State College, eventually becoming known by its current name, Michigan State University. It was also around the turn of the 20th century that Lansing saw the birth of the automobile manufacturing industry in Michigan, when Lansing native Ransom Olds started what would become Oldsmobile. Olds moved the company 90 miles southeast to Detroit, establishing that city as the epicenter of car manufacturing in the world. As the state capital, Lansing would grow into a city of about 72,000 by 1927, while 13 miles away, Bath Township remained very small and very rural with a population of about 300 residents. In the first 2 decades of the 1900s, school children in Bath area went to small one-room schoolhouse scattered throughout the neighbouring farmland. Children in different grades shared the same classroom and the same teacher. There was a total of 10 small schoolhouses in the area, serving the town of Bath and the surrounding area. Most children completed school at the 10th grade level. Educational reform came to Michigan at this time, as there was a widespread belief that children could receive a more complete education if students could attend a single school at one location. The educational opportunity would be extended to the 12th grade. Grades would be divided into classes, and better teachers would be brought into the school. After several years of debate, the residents of Bath decided to build a new single-location school. It would be the first of its kind in Clinton County, Michigan. Designed by R.V. Gay, the school building would consolidate students from 6 school districts, serving the towns of Bath, Dewitt and Victor. It was dedicated in March 1922 with students in 12 grades and a faculty of 10 teachers. The total cost for the construction of the state-of-the-art building was $50,000, with $43,000 of the cost financed by a bond in November 1921, passed by the residents by the vote of 56 for and 20 votes against. After $8,000 was raised by the school board, the remaining $35,000 would come from property taxes at the rate of $12.26 per $1,000 of property valuation, nearly double the previous rate. Local resident M.J. Ellsworth summed up the opinion of most residents when he wrote a chronicle of the incident. Quote, "A consolidated school is expensive in a small community, but it is a help in a great many ways. Parents can feel that their children are safe from the time they leave the door to the time they are brought back, the bus drivers being selected from the most responsible men of the community. Teachers have to be further advanced to teach in a consolidated school than they do in a common country school. When everything is taken into consideration, the consolidated school is the cheapest and best way of education." Not all residents were pleased by the cost, especially some of the farmers, which made up most of the landowners in the district. The new school meant property taxes for the residents of the area, which hit the small farmers hard financially, many of which were forced to shut down their farms and take jobs in other areas. One of those landowners who was upset was 55-year-old Andrew Kehoe, who took a part-time job as a handyman at Bath Consolidated School. Andrew Kehoe was born on February 1st, 1872 in Tecumseh, Michigan, to Philip and Mary McGovern, 2 Irish Roman Catholic immigrants who came to the United States to escape the potato famine of the late 1840s. Philip Kehoe, whose first wife died in childbirth, was an influential member of the Catholic parish who was active in local politics, especially when it came to financial oversight of public funds raised from taxes. During Kehoe's teen years, his mother Mary became ill and was confined to a bed. By the time Andrew reached adulthood, his mother was completely paralysed, eventually passing away in November 1890. Philip Kehoe would again remarry, this time to Frances, a much younger widow with children only a couple of years older than Andrew. Andrew and his new stepmother clashed often, eventually forcing Andrew to leave the family home. With a passion for electrical engineering, Andrew would attend nearby Michigan State Agricultural College to study the growing field. It is also here he met Agnes Ellen Price, known as Nellie to her friends. Andrew would eventually drop out of school and move to St. Louis, Missouri, where he would again study electrical engineering. But at some point during this time in St. Louis, he would be knocked unconscious and suffer a serious head injury. For 2 weeks, Andrew would be in and out of a comatose state. After recovering, he used his electrical knowledge and worked various jobs throughout the Midwest before returning home to Michigan in the early 20th century. At this point, he went back to work on his father's farm, using dynamite to clear the fields of old tree stumps and large rocks. His resentment of his stepmother grew as his father, crippled by arthritis, became more and more dependent on Francis. In late 1911, tragedy hit the Kehoe farm when Francis went to light a pilot on their state-of-the-art stove. Because of a defect in the stove, it exploded, covering Francis with burning fuel. Andrew tried to douse the flames with water, but it only made the situation worse. Miraculously, Francis survived at first, but 2 months later, November 1911, she would succumb to her injuries and pass away. Later reports had Andrew watching her burn for a few minutes before trying to help, while others believed that he was the reason for the defect in the oven. After this incident, Andrew, now in his early 40s, resumed his relationship with his college love interest, Nellie Price. Much like Andrew, Nellie's parents were Irish Catholic immigrants who came to America to escape the potato famine. Her mother died when she was only 18, and as the oldest, she had to raise her 4 siblings. Her father, Patrick, moved to Bath to farm a piece of land owned by his brother Lawrence before moving closer to Lansing to be closer to his brother. Lawrence, a Civil War veteran, made a fortune manufacturing car parts for Henry Ford and the burgeoning automotive industry. Andrew and Nellie would marry on May 14, 1912 and move back to Tecumseh, and with his father in declining health, work the family farm. While there, the newlywed couple joined the local Catholic church. Shortly afterwards, the church decided to tear down the original sanctuary and build a new one. To pay for it, the members were assessed a fee. The Kehoe's share came to $400, which Kehoe just ignored. When the priest came to collect the fee, Kehoe ordered them off the property and never returned to that church. When Nellie's uncle Lawrence died in 1917, he left behind a massive fortune that was mostly donated to charities for such causes as opening hospitals. But the land, including Nellie's childhood home and farm in Bath, remained with his widow. Kehoe went to Richard Price, another of Nellie's uncles, and Lawrence's widow Beulah, and asked about buying her childhood home and some of the land in Bath. A deal was agreed to in 1919, and Kehoe bought the property for $12,000, paying $6,000 down, and the rest with interest as a mortgage to the estate of Lawrence Price. The Kehoes would move to Bath, and Andrew started working on the farm with his impressive modern equipment when compared to his neighbours. The townspeople described Kehoe as polite and friendly with a touch of class and some eccentricities including extreme thriftiness. Just like in Tecumseh, Kehoe would use dynamite and war surplus pyritol to remove stumps and boulders. Although it was extremely dangerous, it was not uncommon for the neighbours to hear explosions from the Kehoe farm. Soon, Kehoe would become the unofficial local expert in using dynamite safely, and he also became known for tinkering with electrical machinery. It wasn't uncommon for his neighbours to come to him for help in fixing or improving their own farm equipment. By 1921, Kehoe was known about Bath for his thriftiness, so when property taxes nearly doubled to finance the construction of the new school, he became politically active in local politics, specifically school politics. With the new school came the need for someone to lead the district. Roy E. Hike was considered ideal for the job of superintendent of the Bath Consolidated School. Born in 1894, Hike volunteered for military service when the United States joined the First World War. He would spend his military time as a training officer, teaching language skills to the new recruits. After his service, Hike would finish his bachelor's degree in agricultural studies at Michigan State College in East Lansing. It was during his studies at Michigan State that Hike would meet and eventually marry a schoolteacher named Ethel. Young and talented, Hike was hired by the Bath Consolidated School Board to be both superintendent and teacher at the new school. For citizens like Andrew Kehoe, they were happy because since he was young, he could be hired cheaply. To prove the school was serious about the future of the students of the area, Hike worked hard to gain educational accreditation for the new school. In order to do so, the school had to meet basic educational standards as set forth by the accrediting agency, which was in this case, the University of Michigan. The standards were that all teachers had to meet specific educational backgrounds. All classes must meet Michigan State regulations, and all staff members must adhere to proper standards of conduct for people of their profession. Less than 3 years after opening, Bath Consolidated was granted accreditation in May 1925. With this distinction, the school was now able to receive federal and state home economic aid and other government grants. Although not as severe in the United States as in Europe, a recession following the Great War caused a recession in global economy. In Bath, it hit farmers more so than others, leading to struggles to make ends meet. With the increased taxes to pay for the new school, there was significant debate in the community about the finances of the school, particularly about the treasurer, Enos Peacock. One of those disgruntled voices in the debate over taxes was Andrew Kehoe, who led a group of citizens that wanted new leadership on the board. When Peacock came back up for re-election in July 1924, he faced 5 challengers for his spot on the school board, including Andrew Kehoe. Through a long process, with multiple votes, Kehoe won the 3-year position as a trustee of the Bath Consolidated School Board. The next week, Kehoe was sworn in and was elected treasurer by the other trustees. Immediately, Kehoe brought disruption to the already long and tedious board meetings. His first target was the superintendent E. Hike. As a responsible school superintendent, Hike had always attended the school board meetings. The meetings of the board viewed his attendance as a good practice by the administrator as the board debated the educational, administrative and financial issues of the school district. Andrew Kehoe saw it as something different. Even though it was completely within Michigan law, he saw Hike's presence as an attempt to control the trustees. He believed that Hike should do his job as superintendent and let the trustees handle the rest. Kehoe tried to have Hike banned from all future board meetings. The other trustees were outraged at the attempt, as the superintendent's presence at board meetings was required in order to receive educational funding from the state of Michigan. Due to his perceived injustices he suffered due to the high school taxes, Kehoe became stubborn and uncooperative at board meetings, clashing with the other trustees at every opportunity. He would vote against any type of expenditure, made motions to adjourn meetings whenever other members disagreed with him, and accused Hike of financial negligence. The accusations of undue influence on trustees and fiscal carelessness was just the beginning of the hostility between Andrew Kehoe and the superintendent. The hatred would escalate over time, as Kehoe would clash with the superintendent and other trustees. In a small victory, Kehoe was able to get Hike's annual salary cut in half from $200 to $100 and his vacation days reduced to 1 week per year. But, for the most part, the other trustees sided with the administrator. Running a school can be expensive, and Hike wanted financial investments from the board for the educational future of the students. Decisions on what was needed by the district was made in consultation with the University of Michigan's accreditation representatives. Kehoe saw the increasing expenditures as a burden for the taxpayers of the district. He saw an out-of-control administrator who acted like he had a blank cheque from the taxpayers. The tight-fisted trustee objected to purchases like new textbooks for students, encyclopedia sets for the library, updated equipment for home economics and shop classes, pictures for classrooms, and basic playground equipment for the lower grades. Eventually, the citizens grew tired of Andrew Kehoe's antics, and he lost elections for both town clerk and county justice of the peace. With each loss, Kehoe turned his emotions inward as his public life spiraled downward. Despite the turning public perception against him, he did have some respect as an active member of the community. In an ironic twist, Hike had to use Kehoe's help in solving a unique problem. During the winter of 1925-26, bees hibernated beneath the school. On cold days, when the furnace warmed up the school, it would inevitably awaken the bees, leading to swarms in the building, stinging students and staff members repeatedly. Hike tried twice to get rid of the infestation, but each time failed. Andrew Kehoe then volunteered his services to get rid of the bees. No one knows what he did underneath the school to exterminate the bees, but it worked. As a result of his success, Kehoe was asked if he would do some much-needed electrical work, and eventually oversee other aspects of school's maintenance, such as general repairs and plumbing. He agreed to provide the services, and he was given unlimited access to the school building as needed. From this, he gained complete knowledge of the school building, including the crawl spaces underneath. The extra money was needed by the failing farmer. In the summer of 1926, Nellie Kehoe would start developing serious health problems. Over the next couple of months, complaining of paralysing headaches and severe coughing, Nellie would be in and out of St. Lawrence Hospital, coincidentally, a hospital built by a donation from her late uncle. When she was home, Nellie became a recluse and rarely left the house. She was concerned that she would pass her illness to other people. She became pale and lost a lot of weight, and even doctors were perplexed by her condition. What they couldn't decide was if she had asthma or tuberculosis. To others who knew her, every breath Nellie took seemed to be a painful struggle. Nellie's health wasn't Kehoe's only problem with the Price side of the family. Ironically, for all of Kehoe's blustering about the misuse of public funds by others, he didn't apply the same principles to his own life. For the first 2 years, Kehoe made his monthly mortgage payment to the Lawrence Price estate. But in March 1921, he abruptly stopped. After no payments for the next 6 years, and after much legal manoeuvring by Kehoe concerning his wife's inheritance, Joseph H. Dunback, the lawyer for the estate, was forced to begin foreclosure proceedings against Andrew and Nellie. Problems began to close in on Kehoe. His wife's health, the mortgage, his political defeats, constant fighting with the other trustees, his hatred towards Hike, all began to change Andrew Kehoe. All of this was in addition to his problems on the farm. Kehoe struggled on the farm, letting his crops rot in the field. Strangely, he was often seen working in the fields while wearing a clean suit, shiny shoes, or a smoking jacket while riding on a tractor. As mentioned earlier, one area in which he was successful on his farm was the use of explosives to clear stumps and boulders. In late 1926, Kehoe would make several trips to Lansing to purchase dynamite, blasting caps, a Winchester rifle, and 100 rounds of ammunition. On New Year's Eve night, and despite the bitterly cold weather, the citizens of Bath celebrated the coming of 1927. As the clock struck midnight, the revellers kissed each other in celebration. But their excitement was interrupted by loud explosions from the Kehoe farm. Kehoe had used some of the dynamite and pyritol to build a bomb and used a timing device to set it to go off at midnight. The neighbours just assumed Andrew Kehoe was playing a joke to celebrate the new year. But in a couple of months, they would find out the real reason for the New Year blast. Over the next couple of months, and although the house was not up for sale, several buyers took interest in purchasing the Kehoe farm. A college professor offered the same amount that Kehoe had paid in 1920, which was $1,200, but the deal fell through when the buyer decided the taxes on the property were too high. During the spring, Nellie's health grew worse. She was in and out of St. Lawrence Hospital, leaving Kehoe at home by himself many nights. Neighbours noticed that Kehoe would often go into town to eat his meals and drive to Lansing to visit his wife, usually returning sometime around 8 in the evening. By the middle of April, a neighbour noticed that Kehoe's trips grew more frequently at night, often putting boxes covered by a tarp in the bed of his truck and ending later and later each night. A few weeks later, in the first part of May 1927, Frank Smith, the head janitor of Bath Consolidated School, noticed a trapdoor in the basement was open. And it wasn't the first time Smith had noticed a trapdoor opened. He had seen it 2 or 3 times before. Around the same time, Smith found a broken lock on one of the back doors. Kehoe was asked if he could fix it, but he said he would have to send it to Lansing for repairs, leaving the door unlocked for now. One of Kehoe's jobs as treasurer of the school board was to distribute paychecks to the staff members on payday. For hike, Kehoe would often forget to bring his paycheck. When Kehoe brought Ward Keyes, a bus driver and the son of another trustee, his May paycheck, Keyes accidentally dropped it to the ground. Kehoe made an anonymous remark, quote, "You better keep that. That may be the last one you'll ever get." Keyes brushed it off as Kehoe's attempt at humour. On Saturday morning, May 14th, a construction crew working nearby reported a large quantity of dynamite had been stolen. That day was also Andrew and Nellie's 15th wedding anniversary, but Nellie was hospitalised once again. Kehoe spent the day discussing his accounts with some of his creditors, but not his mortgage. Later in the day, Lulu Hart, a neighbour across the street, noticed Kehoe loading up his truck with what looked like to be assorted junk, which included old tools, pieces of rusted farm machinery, shovels and nails. The next day, Kehoe planned to get Nellie from the hospital, explaining to her sisters that she'd be staying in Jackson, Michigan with some friends. The hospital called and asked if he could come on Monday instead because the rain would make it difficult for Nellie to travel because of her lung condition. On Monday afternoon, a neighbour, David Hart, and his friends stopped by Kehoe's farm to inquire about buying a horse. Kehoe explained that his wife was in Lansing visiting her sisters. Hart noticed copper wires on the ground from the hen house to a tool shed and back to the hen house. Hart, given Kehoe's background, didn't think much about it. That week was also the last week of the school term before the students got out for the summer. One of the end-of-year activities for the first grade class was a picnic. The teacher, Bernice Sterling, telephoned Kehoe on Tuesday to ask if they could have it on part of his farm. Kehoe asked when she was going to have it. When she said Thursday, the last day of school, Kehoe replied, quote, "Well, if you're going to have a picnic, you'd better have it right now." Sterling thought that response was strange. On that same day, one of Nellie's sisters telephoned to check on her, but there was no answer. Kehoe called back that evening and told the sister that Nellie was in Jackson visiting friends and he would return to get her on Thursday. At around 8:30 that night, just as student Fordney Hart was leaving the Parent-Teacher Association at the school, he noticed a familiar face standing in front of the school. Hart recognised Andrew Kehoe from Kehoe's job as a handyman at the school. He said Kehoe was just standing there, staring at the school. The next morning, May 18th, 1927, began with a thunderstorm and lightning. As the storm cleared, linesmen returned to their jobs of stringing black wires along wooden poles. A great change was coming to Bath: cheap and reliable electricity. Hey friends of the show, sorry for a pause in the story, but just a quick reminder to let you know how you can help support the show by becoming a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/truecrimegrapple, and for $1 US a month you can get a shout out on the show with the assault tier. For $5 a month there is the murder tier, where we'll have early episodes up every so often and we'll have some bonus content coming your way. So check it out. That's patreon.com/truecrimegrapple. Any donation is greatly appreciated and welcomed. Once again, patreon.com/truecrimegrapple. Many thanks. The few buildings in Bath that had electricity used generators, including the school. The well pump was broken and Smith was waiting for the repairman to come and fix it. Because of this, Smith did not want to start the generators yet, so the school day began with no power to the building. Over at the Kehoe place, Kehoe placed a package, an old packing crate filled with unknown objects and sealed tightly, in his truck and drove to town. He wanted to send the package to Clyde B. Smith, an insurance man in Lansing. Smith was the insurance salesman who sold the school a $6,000 surety bond on the school. Since the post office was still closed, Kehoe went over to the train depot to ship it by rail. The railway agent noticed the stenciling on the outside of the box, which read, "High explosives, dangerous." At 7:30 that morning, young Ralph Cushman was getting ready for school. The 7-year-old third grader was excited about the up-and-coming summer break and the chance to play baseball. But he had to get through the last 2 days of school first. Ralph walked his 13-year-old sister Josephine to school that morning. 9-year-old Robert Hart spent the first part of the morning just like he did every morning, feeding about 2,200 chickens on his farm. When he was done, he took his lunch and books and took off for school. 8-year-old third grader Arnold Burrell had missed a lot of school recently because of illness. So on that day, his parents refused to take him to Lansing with his older siblings to shop for shoes, and instead reluctantly made Arnold go to school. Just like every morning, 12-year-old Iola Hart kissed her mother goodbye and started for school and her final days as a 6th grader. Along the way, she stopped and picked a bouquet of lilacs. Since the power was out, Principal Floyd Huggett used the gong to alert students to the beginning of the day. Even though he was only 26 years old, he had been with the school for 4 years and proved to be a capable administrator. At promptly 8:30 Central Time, Huggett started the school day with 230 to 275 students in the building. He then went next door to the Bath Methodist Church to help with graduation rehearsal for the commencement on Thursday. 5th grader Lee Mast also didn't want to go into school that morning. The 10-year-old said he'd hurt his hip, but his mother sent him into school anyway. But just like most students, he was thrilled when his teacher Blanche Hart asked him to go and run an errand. In Miss Leona Gutkunt's 2nd grade class, the students began the day listening to their teacher read them a story. When she was finished, they begged her for one more story. The return to their desks along the west side of the building would have to be delayed for another story. Because she made a B in manners and personal conduct class, Josephine Cushman did not have to take any final exams. Instead, after dropping off her brother, she went to pick wildflowers in the woods just south of the school. Because of testing, Mrs. Hart's 5th grade class switched to the 1st floor classroom with a 2nd floor 6th grade class that had to take a geography exam. One of those relocated students was 12-year-old Gayland Hart, who along the way saw his friend, 5th grader Carlton Hollister, as the 2 grades changed rooms and floors. During the first 15 minutes of the next to last day of school, with all the excitement and the testing and changing rooms and stories, no one knew that in the North Wing basement, A small alarm clock quietly counted down the minutes to 8:45 a.m. When the alarm went off that morning at 8:45, time would freeze for the community of Bath, as a generation of innocent souls wouldn't live to see 8:46. A wire connected to the clock set off a spark which ignited the blasting caps. This caused the hundreds of pounds of dynamite and pyritol stored beneath the north wing of the Bath Consolidated School to explode. About the same time, David Hart's wife Lulu heard a loud noise outside, and then what she thought was a gunshot coming from Andrew Kehoe's place next door. She ran and got David, and they rushed to the property, discovering that not only was the corn crib on fire, but Kehoe's barn was as well. They heard more gunshot noises coming from inside the barn. Back at the school, Smith and the repairman, still in the basement, heard a massive roar as both were knocked into the wall. Over at the north wing, the walls of the building were forced 4 feet into the air before crashing back down, collapsing outward as the roof slammed down onto the floor and pancaked down to the foundation. MJ Ellsworth, one of the first rescuers on the scene, was stunned by what he saw. The north wing was basically gone, walls were destroyed, and the roof lay on the ground. Under it lay the bodies of children, with arms and legs sticking out of the rubble that was once the pride of Bath. On the school grounds, small bodies, both injured and deceased, were scattered with the debris. For a moment, there was silence. Then there was nothing but screams. Screams of children trapped under the rubble. Screams of stunned students knocked out of the school. Screams of mothers rushing to the scene. 8-year-old Doris John's body was hanging by her heels in the rubble, limp and out in the open until somebody was able to extricate her body. In Miss Goodcunt's room, the western wall crumbled onto the empty desks. Fortunately, she had agreed to read one more story and the students were not in their desks at the time of the explosion. In Bernice Sterling's first grade classroom, students were marching around the room doing morning exercises when the explosion occurred. She told the New York Times, quote, "Without warning, this terrible explosion came. I saw the bodies of my children hurled against the walls or through the windows." The 3rd and 4th grade teacher, 21-year-old Hazel Weatherby, did her best to shield her students from the falling debris. She grabbed 2 students and pulled them into her arms in an attempt to protect them. Carlton Hollister found himself essentially back in his original classroom as the new second-room floor had crashed down on the 6th graders in the room below, including his friend Galen Hart. Sylvester Barnard, a sophomore, was thrown through a window. When he managed to get back up, he saw bodies of children strewn throughout the area. He saw dead bodies and dying bodies. He heard the cries of the unbearable pain of the injured. Another 5th grader, Ada Bell Dalton, described seeing her classmate's desk hurtling through the air. She said she felt like she was floating, and she could see rays of sunshine in between her flying classmates. Fortunately for Cleo Clayton, an 8-year-old 2nd grader, he was able to leap through a window and run safely to the front lawn of the school. Perry Hart, a 17-year-old dropout, was in town when the blast occurred. He ran to the school because his three sisters, Isla, Vivian and Elva, along with brother Percy, were inside. Just outside of town, the linesmen who were stringing electrical wires to the top of wooden poles felt the jarring of the explosion. They could see a large cloud of dust in town, and nearby they saw a farm in flames. The linesmen rushed to the Kehoe farm in an effort to help. Finding no one, they decided to try and salvage as much of the furniture as they could. One of them found dynamite in a corner of a room, so the men quickly evacuated the building. Outside, they heard about the school, and knowing they would be needed, immediately went to their cars to rush towards the school. Another neighbour, George Hall, was out looking for two cows that had gotten loose when he noticed the smoke from the Kehoe farm. He picked up two more neighbours, Will Horning and Virgiline Zeeb, and went to the Kehoe place. The trio pulled into the front yard and got out, and they realised the barn was engulfed in flames and could not be saved. A linesman ran out of the farmhouse yelling about the dynamite inside. Then they heard a woman from across the street scream, "The school has been blown up," over and over. Hall had three children inside the school: Billy, 8-year-old George Jr., a 3rd grader, and 11-year-old Willa, a 5th grader. Overcome with fear, George Hall left the Kehoe place and rushed towards town. In other parts of the school, high school students went to the roof in a desperate attempt to escape. Superintendent Hike told Willett Whitney to go get ladders in an attempt to make a rescue effort. He begged the students to hang on and sent others to get more ladders and axes. One student jumped to 14 feet to the ground, then the others would jump, with some breaking their legs in the process. Hike turned his attention to the buried students, some trying to dig their way out from the piles of brick, concrete and wood. He carefully picked up Carlton Hollister and hurriedly took him to the telephone exchange office, put him on the couch, and then went back to the school. Carlton was the first known survivor pulled from the rubble. Ava Sweet and Lillian Wild, trapped beneath the rubble and not knowing what had happened, remembered what to do in case of sudden accidents. Keep still to reserve energy and oxygen. Eva Gubbins, the 6th grade teacher that was given the geography final exam, was trapped by debris. A concrete beam had crushed her legs while an iron radiator was pinned against her back. Next to her, pinned by the same beam, was one of her male students staring at her with eyes wide open. She realised he was dead. Eva tried to turn away, but her head was stuck, so all she could do was close her eyes. Many of the surviving students who were buried in the rubble didn't understand what had happened. Some thought it was a dream. It was simply too much for their young minds to comprehend. As a small, close-knit town, everyone quickly realised what had happened. Just about every family had at least one child inside the building at the time of the explosion. Nearby homes were used as temporary hospitals, with bed sheets ripped into bandages for the injured children. Local women made coffee and sandwiches for the long day ahead. Parents had gathered at the school, looking for their precious loved ones, calling out their names, trying to dig through the rubble. One father found his dead son on the sidewalk and knelt over him, screaming prayers and pounding his fists into the ground. On a grassy open field next to the school, a temporary morgue was set up. Bodies were laid out, covered with blankets. Parents would dreadfully lift the edges of the blankets, fearful for what they would find. Some would scream in anguish as they identified their child. One parent, board trustee and recently widowed Albert Detloff, who earlier that day ran into Andrew Kehoe at the train station and went to the school with him to check out the well pump, found his badly injured daughter and took her home to safety. Once he stabilised the bleeding, he went back to the school to help. In an effort to find survivors, men came from all over the area. Without cranes or other heavy equipment, the rescue effort would be slow and arduous. Most of it would be done by the hands of the rescuers. More help would be needed. At the telephone exchange, 17-year-old Lenora Babcock furiously worked the phone lines, calling nearby cities with the short message, quote, "The school is blown up. We need help." In Lansing, Fire Department Chief Hugo Delfs quickly assessed the situation. He realised quickly that this was an unprecedented disaster and his response needed to be the same. Delfs dispatched a chemical firefighting unit and a truck with a telegraph and telephone equipment. It took just 12 minutes from the time Delfs got the call for the trucks to arrive on the scene. An executive with the Fisher Body Plant and automobile supply factory in nearby Flint happened to be in Bath when he heard the explosion. He quickly found a telephone and called back to the factory in Flint saying, quote, "Send every man you can to Bath." Next, he called a competitor, the REO motor car plant in Lansing, and repeated the message. REO was the new company of Oldsmobile founder Ransom Olds. Back at the Kehoe farm, neighbours Sydney and Charlotte Howell, along with Sydney Armstrong, arrived to help. Through the smoke and flames, they saw Kehoe getting into his truck next to one of the buildings. As he pulled forward through the smoke towards the Howells and Armstrong, he stopped, and with a wild look in his eyes told the trio, quote, "You'd better get out of here. You'd better go down to the school." Kehoe then drove off in the direction of the school. As he drove towards the bomb site, Kehoe passed MJ Ellsworth, who was headed home to get ropes and tools. With a strange grin, Kehoe waved hello to his neighbour. Ellsworth noted that he could see both rows of Kehoe's teeth. Kehoe passed another neighbour pulling a cart and nodded hello. He also passed a distraught young boy on a bicycle, pedalling as fast as he could in the opposite direction of the school. Two linesmen heading to the school were run off the road into a ditch by Kehoe's speeding Ford truck. They watched as the truck pulled up to the front of what was now a pile of rubble. Across the street from the school was Frank Smith's house, now serving as one of the temporary triage centres. The wounded would be brought to these houses until they could be loaded into an ambulance and moved to the hospitals in Lansing. Hike arrived at the Smith house and asked Frank's wife Leonie if they could accommodate more of the injured. She readily agreed and went upstairs to ready more rooms. Hike then went back to the school to help. He approached the school about the same time that Kehoe pulled up in his truck. Kehoe called Hike over, and the superintendent understandably obliged. Hike knew he needed to inform the school board member of the situation. He also asked Kehoe if he could borrow his truck for the rescue efforts, to which Kehoe strangely replied, quote, "Alright, I'll take you with me, I'll take you with me, I'll take you with me, I'll take you with me." Okay everyone, we're going to wrap up part 1 there. So much tragedy and chaos to take in. We're just going to do something a little bit different here this time around on the show. Instead of waiting the usual 2 weeks for the next episode to drop, you're only going to have to wait a week. That's right, just 1 week for the conclusion of this story. It'll be out then, and there's so much more to come from it. I do hope you'll join us then, so make sure you subscribe to the show so that the next episodes automatically download to the device of your choice. And finally, before I leave you, we started putting some episodes up on our YouTube channel. You can find that by searching on YouTube for True Crime Grapple. Not all the episodes are up yet, and I'll be uploading them in a timely period whenever I've got the time to do so, but just for your information, it is out there. That's going to wrap it up for this episode, so until next time, I've been your host Dan, and stay safe out there.